My deductive reasoning tells me you're not Tommy.
And this is supposed to be the smart character in the 17th episode of the all-new Mighty Morphin Zyurangers. Here's where things start to get complicated again, but it's nothing that we haven't encountered before. In fact, it's very much the same conundrum from the earliest episodes of this comparison series. Zyuranger creates 4 standalone but interconnected episodes. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers gets kinda squeamish about that, for part of it. They certainly are right now, and that's all that matters. Zyuranger explores its villains, now facing down an expanded arsenal from the heroes, upgrading their monsters to be tougher. Power Rangers doesn't entirely abandon that concept, but it largely abandons that concept. The result is 2 episodes that are extraordinarily different. Let's start with some common ground. Both episodes feature a Frankenstein's monster-type monster. Both episodes give some level of focus to the blue-colored ranger. Both episodes involve the bad guys mining for clay. I think it's fair to say that's where the similarities end. In Zyuranger, Pleprecon discovers Dokita clay, far stronger than the clay they've been using to create monsters. They undertake a huge mining operation that just happens to be right under the, Speak Lark Ramen Shop where Dawn is now working. The toxic exhaust from the mining causes the restaurant to be overrun with cockroaches. Even that is simply a precursor to the entire establishment, or a Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood model of it, collapsing underground as Bondora, or a Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood model of her, gets away with her giant ball of clay. As if that wasn't bad enough, Dora Frankie, her newest monster, is actually their first creation made with Dokita clay, and he proves strong enough to defeat the Zyurangers, ending the episode on a cliffhanger. Almost nothing I just said happens in Life's a Masquerade. Rita has a relatively long-term plan of creating super putties, which sees her forces mining clay. There's nothing ever established that this clay is special in any way. The Frankenstein's monster is simply created to distract the Power Rangers from their mining operation, ironic given that he leads Billy straight to it. But there is nothing special about the Frankenstein's monster's power. He is never said to be their first experiment in super putty technology. In fact, by moving up footage from the next installment of Zyuranger, he dies by the end of the episode. I almost added never to be seen again, but as we'll see in a few minutes, that's not entirely true either due to how big of a mess this is. Like so many other examples of Power Rangers simplifying multi-part stories, I bet you're expecting me to award the win to Zyuranger quite easily. But it's actually not nearly as cut and dry as that. Here's the pitfall that Zyuranger falls into, one that I have typically found myself levying against Power Rangers, particularly in early episodes. Dora Frankie is pretty cool and all, but he could be anybody. That's not to say there's nothing unique about him. For example, he pulls the bolts out of his neck to create a type of flail weapon. That's pretty cool. But given how instantly recognizable the design is, you would think there would be some narrative or thematic connection that ties the monster and story together. I guess you could say he's an experiment, but that's the closest we get. Ultimately, it doesn't really hurt anything since the story of the episode is full and exciting. However, this allows Power Rangers to seize opportunity in the opposite direction, playing with the idea of a Frankenstein's monster in ways that are surprisingly fun, creative, and uniquely Power Rangers. It was watching this episode that I thought to myself, wow, maybe they're finally getting the hang of this. Life's a Masquerade doesn't tie into the plot of any version of Frankenstein, but it does play on how recognizable the design is and how entwined it is with Halloween. As such, this becomes a Halloween episode about a costume party, and that leads to the amazing idea of one of Rita's monsters walking into the youth center and being mistaken for Tommy in costume. That in itself provides perhaps the best Tommy absence excuse we've seen so far, since it furthers the story rather than existing simply to match the Zyuranger footage. In fact, Barai does not appear in Great Upgrade Clay Monsters, but since he does appear in the following episode that Power Rangers shifts up so they can defeat the monster now, Tommy does have a role to play here. Thank goodness they created their own Frankenstein's monster costume, because I can't imagine how disconnected this would have felt if they had been limited to Dora Frankie footage, most of which they could not have possibly used. That said, the two versions are not remotely identical. Dora Frankie's hair is much more skillfully coiffed. The American monster has longer, messier hair. Dora Frankie has red bulbous eyes, except when he's trying to blend in as part of the gas company. There they stick in some ridiculous normal-looking eyes over the top. It's never commented on, but that's probably the funniest part of the episode. Don uncovers the plot when Dora Frankie kidnaps him and the son of the ramen store owner. Bondora monologues to them, but Dora Frankie is so strong he breaks their cage open, allowing for a fight and escape. With Billy, he gets way too into his Sherlock Holmes persona and decides to investigate whether the Frankenstein's monster, okay, I'm gonna stop doing that, is actually Tommy. It's not so much piecing clues together as it is stalking him. And even though the monster was sent to the party to attack the Rangers, he never does that, but instead goes to the mining cave for some reason. Billy trips the alarm, which leads to the fight.
My deductive reasoning tells me you're not Tommy.
Geez, what tipped you off? The part where he tried to assault a random woman, or the part where he tried to assault Bulk and Skull? I know I used this as the opening gag, but you're supposed to be the smart one, Billy. That said, I do like his technobabble variant of It's Morphin Time.
It's time for molecular transmutation.
Due to their own cave set and own monster costume, they're able to restage this pretty seamlessly. In fact, I think this is the first time we get any original Blue Ranger fight footage, if you can call this one moment of him being thrown a fight. Yeah, it's quite a stretch that no one would talk to the monster they think is Tommy or become at all suspicious over how he's acting, but in terms of making these separate pieces of footage fit together, I've seen far worse. The diminishing of continuity between episodes makes the conclusion to this Power Rangers episode a little weird. Even though the monster is destroyed, Rita still makes off with her clay. The idea of super putties is threatened several times in this episode, but it doesn't play into the ending at all. Rita simply delivers her standard, "Oh, why was I defeated?" lament at the end. But she wasn't. The monster only existed to distract from the mining of clay, which it did. She won! This would have been a perfect moment to build that up, especially since the next episode is going to continue with that. Instead, it's completely ignored, even by the villain, so that we can have a stock happy ending. Honestly, that's about all I have to say about these. Story is actually going to be a tough one to award because they're both good stories. Zyuranger's story is far more important, but Power Rangers is far more charming. It's such an apples and oranges thing that I'm just gonna give it a tie. For characters, Zyuranger actually tries to let their characters branch out of their hero roles. They desperately need it. At least that's the case for everyone but Geki, who's too focused on justice to get caught up in the part-time job craze everyone else does. I never noticed as a kid, but playing the leader is such a boring role. It's so cute seeing the other three Zyurangers demand to follow in Don's footsteps and get part-time jobs of their own. But there's a reason I didn't mention it in the comparison proper. What I just showed you is pretty much all there is. It has nothing to do with anything and exists to kill time in a manner I've far more come to expect from Power Rangers. Life's a Masquerade plays with its characters more, even if some of it is a token scene of Angela rejecting Zack. Bulk and Skull get a minor moment to be heroic. Alpha takes advantage of the costume party to leave the command center and become very, very popular. I have to give it to Power Rangers. Action is also tough because of how Power Rangers brings in footage from another episode. When I covered the first episode, I gave action to Power Rangers on that basis. However, I feel Great Upgrade Clay Monsters delivers a much more compelling cliffhanger than The Birth did way back when. Life's a Masquerade has a solo Tommy fight, but Zyuranger has fun model shots that make me clap my hands with delight. I'm giving it to Zyuranger, and I guess that leaves me with a tie. Been having a lot of those lately. The Zyuranger storyline continues, and so does the Power Rangers one. Kind of. Bondora has her giant mound of Dokita clay, and Pleprecon wastes no time in using it to create stronger golems. Dora Frankie indeed defeats Daijujin, but the Tyrannosaurus whisks Geki away to join Barai on a mission to retrieve new weapons, the Thunderslingers that might defeat Dokita clay monsters. However, they are guarded by the Beast Knight god King Brachion. Geki and Barai must work together to retrieve the weapons, save their friends from the golems, and finally defeat Dora Frankie. Or do they? And has this all been a distraction to set in motion an even greater evil? Gung Ho actually matches its counterpart's plot much more closely than the first part. Obviously, it cuts out everything that would keep this from being a standalone episode, as well as all the Dora Frankie elements that were shifted to Life's a Masquerade, but everything else is fairly similar. First, allow me to thank the Guardian Beasts for finally giving Barai something to do. Look, I get the appeal and tension of limiting his screen time for dramatic effect, but it's just been the same thing over and over again to the point that I barely care about this guy anymore. I'd say he's been reminding me of the "but you didn't do anything" memes of Tuxedo Mask, but at least he also had character building scenes with Usagi. So finally, we get an episode that pairs the two brothers together. Unfortunately, they want to drag out Barai's secret a bit longer. Geki has to ask why he's always disappearing like he does. Barai doesn't answer him, and it's never brought up again. Yes, Barai laments to himself that he doesn't want to cause Geki pain, which is flimsy enough on its own, but there's no way Geki's gonna let it go that easily, come on. At any rate, this finally gives us a Power Rangers episode where they don't have to come up with an excuse for why Tommy is absent. Instead, they create a more Power Rangers-centric plot. About teamwork again! Jason and Tommy are competing together in a martial arts tournament, but they just bicker all the time and can't work together. From what I've heard about Austin St. John's and Jason David Frank's relationship, apparently this was art imitating life. Ultimately, Zordon sends them on the quest to retrieve the new weapons to teach them a lesson about working together. In theory, this is definitely a good story idea that matches the Sentai footage quite well. I don't know if it completely nails the idea though. While we see a little bit of them practicing forms together, most of what their friends are criticizing them for is being competitive while sparring. I mean, they're literally practicing competing against each other. Seems like they're doing that just fine. And in the actual competition against the cartoon ninjas, it ends up being one-on-one tag team. The martial arts on display look great, but where is the teamwork? The very last section of the competition is a doubles match where Tommy and Jason successfully fight side by side. That's 10 seconds of this 3-minute sequence. Even the title confuses me. When Trini tells Jason and Tommy they need to gung-ho, she explains it's Chinese for working together. Kind of? Look, I don't speak Chinese at all, but I did look this up. Obviously, as a loan word in English vernacular, being gung-ho about something is being excited or motivated, which Jason and Tommy clearly already are. But as far as I can find in my research, the Chinese phrase from which that was adapted specifically referred to democratically run organizations producing industrial goods. Maybe it's just me, but I think it's a bit of a stretch to apply a term from industrial cooperatives to rivals working together, but again, I could be missing something. I have found conflicting information about when these episodes aired, and I don't trust either source enough to state it for certain. Wikipedia says that Life's a Masquerade aired first. The Power Rangers Wiki, which has burned me before, states that Gung Ho aired before it. That leads to Rita unleashing her super putties before getting the clay for them. I mean, I can totally see that being the case. Honestly, either way these episodes aired, there was going to be a big problem. Showing Gung Ho first introduces that problem into the mix, but if you show Gung Ho second, you're left wondering why the Frankenstein's monster is hanging out at Rita's palace when he's already dead. Yeah, he's present for an entire scene while the super putties are being made. And this isn't like the blink and you'll miss it giant kid behind the Megazord, he's pretty obvious. So it's a trade-off. At least if you watched Gung Ho first, you might be teased about this cool new monster Rita was holding off on. Another unavoidable American oopsie is that the Thunderslingers are clearly marked with a Zyuranger label. I wonder who these Zyurangers are. They sure are nice to let us have their weapons. Obviously though, in terms of the actual narrative, the monster is dead. Because of losing the Dora Frankie context, Power Rangers had to come up with a new inciting incident to put the Rangers on their quest. When time needs to be filled, it's a putty fight. But in this case, it really does the job. All 6 Rangers together can't beat these guys and are recalled to the command center. I don't have much to say about it, it's not amazing or anything, but given how this show has been, I'm always impressed to see newly created connective tissue connecting seamlessly, especially when the story is having to be rearranged so heavily. It's the same with Jason's and Tommy's replacement shots when they're being attacked. It's seamless. I guess I'm giving it faint praise, but I'm so happy when they actually shoot good replacement footage instead of just awkwardly cutting around things. What I remember this episode most for as a kid was the introduction of Titanus, which is what King Brachion is known as in Power Rangers, and Tommy giving Jason his shield for extra protection. It's just cool. It's a great moment in either episode. It is still changed a little bit. In Zyuranger, the switch-off is just good strategy. One person needs to get the weapons, the other is going to provide cover against King Brachion. Therefore, it makes sense to give the runner extra defense and the cover fire extra offense. Because of that, Geki gives Burai his Ryu Geki Ken, and Burai gives Geki his shield. These two aren't learning a lesson though. Burai nipped any character growth in the bud the moment he had the chance. It's not an epiphany for them, it's just common sense. In order to impart the lesson of the day, Power Rangers changes the dialogue slightly.
I've got the strength to get up the hill faster than you, but you're better with a sword than I am.
Ooh. I get why they wrote it like that, I really do. The point is to drive in the idea that they've learned to sacrifice their pride by admitting the strengths of the other. But since Geki gives up his sword, Jason, the guy whose designated weapon is the sword, has to admit he's less of a swordsman than the guy whose weapon is a flute. That would be like if Kimberly told Billy, "Hey, you take this shot because you're a better archer than I am." If that's the case, I think they really need to have a conversation with Zordon about how to more effectively distribute tasks in this team. Because Life's a Masquerade pulled so much from this episode's ending, Gung Ho has a laughably quick conclusion, which is probably why the last several minutes of this episode are Jason and Tommy competing against cartoon ninjas. While the enhanced golems have been trashing the other four Zyurangers all episode, defeating them is only the prelude to the rematch with Dora Frankie. As such, as soon as the Thunderslingers enter the fight, the golems are done. They're dispatched easily. But that's all that's left in Power Rangers, which is a little anticlimactic. It works okay enough, but it's just over so fast. The new weapons don't even get a name. In Zyuranger, the Thunderslingers are combined with the Ranger Gun to form Ranger Slingers, which damage Dora Frankie enough so that the Guardian Beast can finish him off. And it's the post-Ranger Slingers footage that is used to show the monster's defeat in Life's a Masquerade. In Zyuranger, though, that's where the twist occurs. The impaled Dora Frankie doesn't die, but mutates into Zombie Frankie, and his role in the story continues. On top of that, while the Zyurangers were fighting, Bookbok and Totepot erected a column that transforms into a huge pillar that towers above the city. So while these two Power Rangers episodes have showcased two conflicts coming to a close, we're going into a third episode of Zyuranger where the threat has not been resolved. Both of those are fine. In some ways, I'm impressed that Power Rangers is successfully managing to separate these out. Also, it's not as if Zyuranger doesn't have its own problems. Remember the tragedy of the Speak Lark ramen shop? That continues here. Briefly, they get one scene where the kid encourages his dad to hitch up the old ramen cart and start over again. And so they do. And they're never seen or mentioned again. It's Ryota syndrome, where a storyline is a huge deal in the first episode, only to be dropped as quickly as possible. At least this has some resolution, as pathetic as it is. Time to score these. For story, this is another one that's surprisingly tight. They both do a great job at putting things together. But given the few areas of stretched applicability to Jason and Tommy, I guess Zyuranger has the slightest of edges. Characters is a bit easier, but not by much. It's great to see Burai and Geki together, and the handing off of the shield is nice foreshadowing for later. However, nothing really happens with their characters, they simply go on a mission together. Jason and Tommy at least have an interpersonal obstacle to overcome. Power Rangers wins. Finally, for action, the extra putty fight is good, and I hand it to Power Rangers for breaking formula by not having a standard monster. Still, Zyuranger delivers a hard-fought victory only to flip the tables by showing the monster is still stronger than they thought. Zyuranger wins, which allows a mystery, the attacking Beast Knight God, to win overall. Thanks so much for watching! Zyuranger just turned 30, which means Mighty Morphin Power Rangers turns 30 next fall. You'd expect me to make some joke where I say I feel old. I do that way too much in my real life, I'm not doing it. I don't feel old. You may think this is some setup for a joke, but it's not. I'm just self-indulgently reclaiming my perception of time. Deal with it. In our next match, Power Rangers finally gives in to the multi-part madness with its Island of Illusion, having to play catch-up to the Zyurangers storyline that's already 2 parts in. Can they keep up the same level of quality, or is the House of Cards going to fall? As always, I'd love to know what you think. A special thanks to all of my patrons. I will see you next time!